I know. I'm so sorry about that. That was clearly the wrong button that I've pressed there. I hope is this the right one? I think it's the right one. Microphone is switched on. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this very exciting DAZ Studio session. Good morning, Rod. I hope the caffeine is going to kick in soon. Also, good morning, Natesh. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Backdoor 3D. Grüß dich auch. That is my neighbor from Broward County. That's just a few miles up the road from me. How exciting that you're all here today. That's really cool. I've been having a busy week, even though I've got no videos to show for it, which is a bit of a shame. But I've done a lot of testing and playing around with many things. And I hope I can share some of them with you today. Julia is here with me today as well. She is hacking away at the keyboard. She'll be joining the chat. And sadly, she has a full-blown cold. So I have something in my throat that I feel I'm getting. Well, I hope it's not going to come out and I can knock it on the head with good old-fashioned acetaminophen. In the UK, by the way, and in Germany, we call acetaminophen paracetamol. Did you know that? It's very interesting. It's the same thing, but it's known as two different things across both sides of the Atlantic. I don't really know why. They're both derived from the actual chemical name, and I've forgotten what that is, sadly. But you can read more about this in my book, Super Survivor. No, actually, it's called Broken Bowels, Tales of a Super Survivor. There we go. So this morning I have, good morning, more people. Biscuits, how you doing? Biscuits is joining us from Holland. Bodo. Lighting tutorial, yes, it's coming up. It's been something I've been thinking about, and I got so busy with other things. So I hope I'm not doing my day job on Sunday because I've got some hand pain right now. But it's just not really important. I'm totally happy hacking away at the keyboard. But my point is that perhaps, hopefully, I will have more time to make some more pre-recorded tutorials that should go live during this week. So there we go. Let's start today by having a look at what we're actually going to do. So I've got so many things open here on my computer. This is, in fact, the scene we're going to be building today. You've seen this in the thumbnail, and this is going to demonstrate two things. One is, of course, the dForce engine, DAZ Studio's own cloth draping engine. I'll say more about that in a moment. And another item on the agenda that we're going to have a look at today is this mysterious denoiser that has kind of been smuggled into DAZ Studio 4.11 in the beta version. It's not in 4.10, 4.11 isn't quite released yet, but we all have access to a beta version, and the denoiser is in there. So I'll talk about both these things. This is the scene that we're going to be building here. This is the backdrop is Daniel Marfono's White Spring Collection number 3, and I've used this before because it's such a nice and quick and easy backdrop to do things in. And I'm using that to showcase two things really with the dForce engine. So one is the fact that my character is sitting here, and this outfit here, which is an outfit by Biscuits and Gordon, by the way. Lovely that you could join us today, Biscuits, and see this in action. This is one of the dForce outfits I own, and this is an item that already comes with dForce kind of built in, and it's ready to be simulated. So that's why I'm using that. So the magic about dForce is, of course, that the character doesn't just sit here and I now have to go and fiddle with bits and bobs that make the dress or the skirt draped the way I want it. It just goes and does it all by simulating more or less an animation. Sometimes that's tricky to create and to get right, so we'll have a look at how that works. The other two things here, this one on top of the table and above the light here, those are literally just two plain primitives that I've created in DAZ Studio, and I've just put them over our objects and then let the simulation run, and then the plane kind of settles and folds in the cracks and crevices as regular fabric would do. This is inspired, by the way, I'm doing this because one of my most popular videos on my channel is in fact how to make this animation work, or this kind of cloth draping work, with DAZ Studio and Marvelous Designer. So that's about 2 years old, year and a half old. It's one of my most popular videos, and people really like it, and this is something that people really want to do in DAZ Studio or with DAZ Studio. So that's why I thought this is a good topic for today, to see how it kind of compares and how it holds up to DAZ Studio's own version there, the dForce engine. And dForce, by the way, it's so I guess DAZ Studio were listening to feedback from users and saying, hey, we're dealing with a lot with cloth, and there's really no real way of making that look ideal in every pose. So I guess that's why they put that in there. So but dForce, from what I understand, is dForce isn't just the cloth draping engine, it's a fully blown physics simulation, and I believe the team want to expand that eventually into things like soft body and other kind of, much like the bullet physics engine. I don't really know what the dForce engine is, if it's off the shelf or if it's an in-house development. No one knows. They're all shrouded in mystery, like so many things at DAZ. So that's one thing. This is the scene that we're going to be building, and I'll have a look at all the products there in a minute. The other thing that I want to have a look at, of course, is the denoiser. And this is another image here I've built. Let me go and to fit that on. This is an image that is, well, actually, let me just go and put all these things in here. This is the image that, where is it again? Yeah, this is the image that that I've rendered since, no, this is not right, is it? There we go. Yeah, so this is an image I've rendered with, there's a lot going on here. This is something that took about 2 hours, had about 3,000 iterations, and we can still see a little bit of noise in the background. So there's a lot going on here. There's depth of field, there's a lot of translucency in the hair, and if I go and fill my screen here, then I can see that there's just noise going on here in the background and on this character's skin. But it already took 2 hours to render, and that is one thing that, you know, isn't great. Let's just say that. So there is another way to do this, namely with this mysterious denoiser. And if I switch that on after the same amount of time, I get this result. I don't know how visible this is going to be on YouTube, so I'm going to go and post these images on an article with more information about the denoiser. And I'm going to, in fact, I can probably post that while we're doing this, and then it's not quite finished yet, but at least you've got a link that you can go to and explore these images on your own in full resolution there. So the difference is, or how this actually works, is that when you start the denoiser off, it'll look something like this, and that's fairly creepy. Bless you, Julia's sneezing away. That's, you know, make sure you don't get anything on the keyboard. Get the tissues ready. Don't infect me, don't infect me. So this is how the denoiser looks like after 10 iterations. So it hasn't actually kicked in. This is what we regularly see in a render. And then after about a minute, after about 25 iterations, we see something like this. And that looks creepy because usually at the beginning of a render, we see just still a noisy image, just less noise, but still noisy enough to get annoyed about. So the thing with what the denoiser does is, as soon as it does kick in, it gets rid of all the noise. It doesn't look pretty, but the more it keeps going, like this is now after 2 minutes, it comes up with more and more of a nice looking picture here. And this is the denoiser after 10 minutes, or no, after 5 minutes, and after about 150 iterations, which is not a lot, to create an image that is indeed noise-free. And then, of course, we've got the denoiser after 10 minutes. So as the longer we leave this running, the better the image gets. And then eventually I've got this image after about 2 hours. So that's not bad at all. And it can drastically reduce render time and give us a more or less accurate representation of how our image is going to look like eventually. So if we just want to have a quick nosy at how the overall scene and the overall lighting is going to look like, that's where the denoiser can really help. And it's not going to work in every situation, it's not going to be accurate and amazing in every situation, but it'll be exciting to see where this is going and how we can all utilize it. And I just wanted to show you where that is and what that is. So in DAZ Studio, before we even continue, it is in DAZ Studio 4.11. You'll find it under the Render Settings tab in the Filtering menu. And on the Filtering menu, we have this drop down here that just whittles these things down. We have the Post Denoiser. And by default, it's set to off. And all we need to do is set it to on, which makes it available. And now we need to, well, that makes it available. And then we need to set it to on. And then it's on. There's really no parameters that we can set there. The only thing is the denoiser start iteration. That means after how many Iray iterations is going to kick in. So the default is after 8. So the first 8 iterations we see nothing that the denoiser does, but after that we see this really smudged and mushy image that kind of gradually becomes clearer, but doesn't have any noise. So that's that. Wow, busy chat, guys. Thank you so much for chipping in. I really appreciate that. I think Julia has a Theraflu. She's had that for breakfast, so there we go. Well, let us, exactly, Summer Spirit outfit by Golden and Biscuits does not exist. Oh, that's a shame. Okay, let's have a look at the products that we're going to be using for the image. This is my character here by Fred Winkler and Sabi, two amazing 3D artists, and she came, I believe she came with the Victoria 8 Pro bundle. There we go. So we're going to be using her today. I found her in my library, and I haven't actually used her for anything. So that's the main character we're going to be using. We're going to use this as a backdrop here, Daniel Marfono's White Spring Collection. They have 4 in total, and all of them come with little lighting presets, full scenes, and just they all look great. It's really nice. I've looked at these before. They are on sale actually, which is good to know. Good to know. We're also going to use Biscuits outfit, Biscuits and Godin's Summer Spirit outfit for Genesis 3 female. Comes with, I believe, 12 beautiful textures. There are many add-on texture packs available for it, and the amazing thing about this outfit is that it just looks great when it's draped. So there we go. You get that from Renderosity, just like with Daniel Marfono's White Spring Collection. Elizabeth is available from DAZ Studio, and if you have any questions, there is this guide here about dForce and where to even start. All we get as a documentation really that DAZ Studio gives us is a casual forum post, and work it out by yourself, and oh yeah, maybe look on YouTube. That's all the information we get. So that's our starting point here. I'm gonna see if I can post that in the chat, or in the documents, actually in the comments. I'll post that, unless you can have a look for that. Julia, I didn't give you that link, did I? No, I didn't. I missed giving you that link. Sorry about that. One of those things. dForce start here, so I'll go post that in a moment. The other interesting links, I'm going to post that in my article actually. Let me just give you that link to my article. This is it, about that denoiser in DAZ Studio 4.11. I'm going to publish that now, and I'll go and put that on my Twitter and Facebook page as well. So it's not quite finished yet, but that's kind of a good jumping off point there. So let me just quickly put that in the chat so that we have that. Oh wow, thank you so much. Somebody's just joined my Patreon campaign. Thank you so much. That's really exciting. Sadly, it's come up with Chinese characters, and I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry, but thank you nonetheless. So that's very exciting. I'm just going to go and post that link in the chat, which means I have to go onto a different computer. And bear with me here, people. Bear with me. And then we're going to go fiddle something in DAZ Studio. There we go. That's that link. Yes, David, I've also had that happen with the denoiser, that it doesn't seem to do anything as soon as you try and use it. And my cure for that was indeed to close DAZ Studio down and open it again. That's one thing. And also keep up with the latest beta version. That may also do the trick. That's my experience. That's what I've had there. It literally happened yesterday. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I was thinking, when is it going to kick in? And it hasn't actually kicked in. So before we get started with anything serious, let me just give you an overview of how dForce is meant to work. Let me switch that aspect frame off, so I've got a full perspective viewport here, and I'll start with a few primitives, like so often. Let's go and bring in 2 plane primitives. One is going to be a slightly larger version that's going to simulate the ground, which we just put our scene on. And the ground is important because if we drape cloth and there is no ground, then the cloth doesn't know where to stop draping and doesn't fall to the ground. It just kind of hangs down. So let's go and create a new primitive. That's up here, create primitive, or there's also little icons that you can use. I prefer the menu here, new primitive, and let's use a plane with just a single division and a size of maybe, I don't know, 20 meters. So that's our ground. There we go, that's our ground. And I'll go and name that appropriately, ground. And then we're gonna go and create the same thing again. It's just slightly smaller, so this is going to be, whoops, there we go, sorry. Well, actually, let's do this, shall we? We can do that, perfect. So let's do another plane, and this one I'm going to make 2 meters maybe. But the important thing with that is I'm not going to set the divisions to 1. I need to give that a fair amount of geometry so that that can be draped in a moment. So that's very important. So let's go and give that about 100 divisions. You can give it more. Just be mindful that if you give it like 200, 300, 400 divisions, it's going to be taxing on your computer. So 100 is going to be fine. We don't even know where it is yet because we don't have a light in our scene there. Can I do this? No, that doesn't do anything. I'm going to go and color this in so that we go and get a bit of an impression of where what is. So I'll just go and put the default color to something like a blue perhaps. There we go. Then we get a little bit of a representation of what that is. There. So that's that. We can move that around. I'm going to make that my cloth. Just call that cloth. And one other thing we need is kind of the star of the show, which is let's make it a sphere. So let's go and create a new primitive. Make it a sphere, maybe 1 meters, divisions don't matter, and that's kind of the star of our show. So our cloth is going to be draped just above it so that the simulation in a moment has time to make this thing fall down and then make sure anything that intersects with it will be kind of bulged out and the rest of it will be hanging down there. In fact, come to think of it, perhaps it's not quite large enough. Maybe I will just make it a bit larger. There we go. That should get a nicer effect there. So just put that up there, and right now any kind of physics engine, if you've explored this in other programs, they don't really know what's a collision object and what's the actual cloth object. So with dForce, we need to tell our cloth object that it is a cloth object, and everything else in the scene is presumed to be a colliding object. So it'll collide with that clothing item, and that is doable with the thing selected. At the top here under Edit, we can go to Object, Geometry. So they've really hidden that well. Geometry, Figure will also work. Figure or Object, Geometry. And then at the very bottom here, can I make that visible? There we go. We've got these options here, 5 of them. Add dForce Modifier Static Surface, add dForce Modifier Dynamic Surface, add dForce Modifier Dynamic Surface Add-on, remove dForce modifier, and clear dForce simulation from selected items. So those are the options that we have. We've also got some of these things, and no one really knows what they are, but hey, they're in there, so that's good to know. So what we need, what I've found out works the way I expect it to work, like Marvelous Designer works, or the Blender cloth engine works, is this one here, Dynamic Surface. So add dForce modifier Dynamic Surface. If you do that, sadly, we see nothing. So if we look in our scene tab, we don't get an additional node or anything. So if this thing has this applied now or not is kind of, we hope it has, but there's really no way for us to know. So that's an implementation I'd like to see changed perhaps there, because if I have 3 objects in my scene, I can kind of guess what has what applied, but if I don't, then I'm in trouble, aren't I? So there we go. That's just one thing that I've noticed. I guess it's early days for the dForce engine. Once we've done that, we need to tell dForce to simulate this thing and let this cloth drape onto our sphere. And there's a special tab for that, which is the simulation settings tab. So I've got it docked down here already. If it's not showing for you, head over to Window, Panes, Tabs, and then at the very bottom here, is that, yeah, there we go, the simulation settings. Make that available, and then you can go and dock it anywhere you like. On here we have several options to adjust how the gravity in our scene works and all that. Under simulation, there's kind of the most important thing is the simulate. It's frames to simulate. It's either current frame, animated using the timeline range, or custom. For this demo, I'm going to use current frame, but for real life scenes, I found that isn't really working well. So I'm going to go and explain how that works integrated with the timeline. So while we're talking about panes, the timeline is usually at the bottom here, and I can open that up and close it again. I usually have it closed if I'm not working with animations, but just in case timeline isn't showing, then make sure it's you bring that up also under window, panes, and then there's the timeline here at the bottom somewhere. So that's something we'll need for the actual scene. I'm going to leave everything in default, and just the one thing I want to bring to your attention is the frames to simulate. So I'm going to leave that on the current frame. So what should happen now is if I click that blue simulate button up here, then dForce should go to work and do this for me. It'll kind of gradually go through and drape that cloth over the sphere, and hopefully doesn't intersect with the sphere, and as soon as the cloth hits the ground, it'll just flatten out there. I can see that it's kind of done that. If you want to see that behave like silk or like a stiffer material, then excuse me, then you can, and then there's several parameters that you can fiddle with and emulate different types of cloth. So, you know, jeans versus silk versus tarpaulin, for example. No problem, Marcus. Thank you so much for dropping in. I appreciate that you could make it. Great. I'll see you next time. So that's how dForce works in principle. And what you can also do is ask dForce to simulate this longer. So I believe right now it's set to the frames per second modifier. So this is how many frames it'll actually simulate it, or how many times per frame it does that. But if we just quickly look at the timeline here, my timeline also has 30 frames right now, but if I wanted my total duration to be longer, I can on the bottom here I can give it instead of 31, I'll give it 61. So that's basically 60 frames plus 1 0 frame at the beginning. So that's now 60 frames, and frames per second can still be 30. So that's twice the amount of frames than we had before here. And I can go and under frames to simulate, I can now go and set that to animated, use timeline play range. And if I do that, then I get to simulate more frames. So that means the cloth has more time to fall down. That's sometimes necessary. The 30 frames will get you only so far. Sometimes you need just a longer time to make that happen. So if I wanted to do that, I can hit the simulate button again, and then my animation starts again. But this time it should go, if you look closely at the timeline slider here, it should go through not 30 frames, which is kind of the result that we're going to reach about now. It'll keep going. So now I can see that the cloth actually does more draping. So it goes and now it kind of comes to a standstill. This is kind of what I would expect. I'm drinking good Cuban coffee, by the way. It's a mixture between Folgers decaf and the... I can never remember that name. What was it again? Bustelo. There we go. Bustelo. Roasted right here in Miami. And I may get that same cold that Julia is getting, so not exactly what I had expected. Perfect timing to quickly get that live stream done. So there we go. That's how dForce works in a nutshell. And then if we move the timeline slider, we can maybe pick a better frame of draping. That's the other advantage I found with the animation, that I'm not stuck with frame 30, which is what we'd get if we use the current frame option. If we're using the animated time slider, we can kind of pick when our draping looks perfect. Notice that right now, because of my only 100 divisions here, I can see some, well, kind of blocking here. But don't worry about that, because this was just my plane primitive. If I want to get rid of that with my cloth plane primitive thing selected, I can always go over to Edit, Object, geometry and convert that to sub D. So that applies Pixar's subdivision surface modifier, and that doesn't so much divide the geometry, the kind of the root geometry, if you will. It just implies more polygons on the fly. So it keeps the geometry count, the polygon count fairly reasonable, while adding a nice effect. And now you can see it's improved. You can then also increase that if that's not quite enough for you. Then the cloth looks, you know, better in your scene. So that's kind of a final step I'd recommend there. So there we go. That's how dForce works in principle. Let's have a look at building this into our scene and then simulating it on an actual object, namely on Biscuit's outfit there. I'm going to go and close the timeline down. I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene, and then we'll go and build the actual thing. I guess I'll start with the scene backdrop. You don't have to do it. If you want to keep it simple, then you can just have your character perhaps sit on something like a block or whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find it here. In DAZ Studio formats, I believe this one is under props. There's DM, and I've got White Spring number 3, and I believe I'm just going to go start to speed this all up with a pre-made scene here, which I believe for my thing I used this one here. That's right, Rod. It is actually very similar to the dynamics in Poser, and in fact it's also very similar to Marvelous Designer. In fact, all clothing kind of draping mechanisms seem to work that way. The only difference is that sometimes you have to be specific about what is the cloth and what is the colliding object. So I believe in Poser, if I remember that correctly, you have to tell Poser explicitly, well, this is cloth and this is something that the cloth collides against with, and the rest of the objects, if they're undefined, then they won't take part in the simulation at all. I believe Carrara works like that as well. We get, with our scene, we also get a camera, and I think I'm going to go ahead and use the camera. This is something before I go any further, the room looks pretty dark right now, and one of my Patreon supporters, the amazing Steve Wood David, has in fact given me a wonderful trick. He says, hey, when I think in my last live stream I said, well, why don't we drop a linear point light in here to illuminate the scene so I can see what I'm doing while I work, or I switch my headlamp on the camera and all that. He said, even easier, press Control L and ta-da, scene lights come on. So that's a really cool tip. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. I'm not sure if you made it. He's in Australia. That means right now it's about, well, 2:45 in the morning for him. So maybe it is just very late. So if you are there, say hello. We're all thinking of you, and thank you so much for this tip, Steve. Awesome. So Control L is the magic keyboard shortcut I wanted to share with all of you. Oh my goodness, there you are. I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. I thought, you know what, when I saw your avatar, Steve, this is so cool. I'm glad you're keeping awake there in Australia. How exciting. Have you got a coffee to keep you company? That is so exciting. I have somebody who's called DreamLab Studio. I thought I have, are you here as well, DreamLab? That'd be so cool. Are you both here? DreamLab, are you here? Backdoor, yeah, I may have mixed you up in my head there, so sorry about that. One of those things. So yes, the amazing Steve has given me this amazing shortcut, and I wanted to share this with all of you. Control L, there we go. We can switch it on and off at will. It makes scene building so much easier. This is what I so appreciate about the community, by the way, that we all kind of scramble around with this weird product that we're given for free, and no one really explains this to us, and we're all kind of on the same cards, and we're all going, how am I going to do this? And this is what this community is all about. I love this. I love it when this happens. So fantastic. So there we go. This is our scene to begin with, and I'm going to go and leave that camera just as it is for now. I'm going to go back to my perspective view and go have a look at where I'm going to place my character. So my vision of this is to go and put that character about here, have her sit down here, and then have that cloth draped appropriately. Let's see if we can do that here without running into any issues. So first of all, before we have too many objects in our scene, I think I'm going to go and turn all this, including the front light, I think I'm going to put all that into a group. I think that's going to be a good idea. Create a new group, and that's my scene. And I'm doing that so that I can kind of clear up my scene tab here a little bit. The planter can probably go in there as well. Actually, that's the object that she's sitting on. I'm going to leave that out. That's cool. Okay, let's go and bring in a character here. On my Smart Content tab, under Figures, here she is, Elizabeth. And I believe she's already set up to work in Iray, so her default materials will be Iray materials. That's going to be good. And there she is. I'm going to bring her forward. Whoops, that's the scene, isn't it? With the scene, also with the scene selected. Let me just click that little arrow icon at the top here. So if we do that, then that scene becomes unselectable. I may also do that with the planter, actually, so that I can't accidentally select anything that I don't want to move. So there we go. So now if I do this, that won't accidentally move. So all I can now do is click my figure, double click the figure to select the whole figure, by the way, and move her forward a little bit. And this is important to do because when we go and animate this simulation, we need to not have her sit down in place, which is kind of here, which is the center of the scene. If I put the outfit on and she sits down right here, then that's not the same as sitting down from here. So it's very important that the skirt is kind of underneath her and then she moves back and sits down. Otherwise this is not going to be a realistic result. So I'm going to go put her here. Don't put her too far away because otherwise this is all going to be simulated later on, and we don't want to do that. We want to make sure she can just go move back a little bit, and then the skirt is going to be underneath her. So with her kind of in place like this and with Elizabeth selected, let's go over to my content tab and let's see if I can find that. See if I can find that outfit. I believe it's under Genesis 8 female, and there is clothing, golden biscuits. There we go. GB Summer Spirit outfit. Let's put the skirt on and the top, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't quite fit properly. So all the under breast issues here, that's all going to be taken care of by the dForce engine. Hopefully, at least that's the plan. So one thing before we start the animation now, let's bring up the timeline and make sure we save this pose as it is right now as a keyframe. So we do that by clicking on that little plus icon on the bottom. So with Elizabeth selected, it's kind of animation fundamentals with whatever is selected. You can click the plus sign down here. Can I bring that up? This is just out of vision, isn't it? Excellent. That's not so good. So this little plus sign down here, if you click that, then you can move the timeline slider to a different position and do something else. So in our case, I'm going to go and kind of trust the fact that 30 frames is probably going to be appropriate. Let's try that and go ahead and give our woman a different pose. So I'm going to use a pose from Daniel Marfono. In fact, I'm going to go with the White Spring Collection number 3, and anything will work really. Just make sure that hands are not intersecting with the geometry you're trying to simulate. So in these poses here, for example, they may be a little bit difficult. There's a lot going on. It's you could try it, but something that like this, for example, that could be difficult because the hand is intersecting with the geometry right now, and that can sometimes explode the whole thing. So what you might do with poses like that is take the hand and just move it up, and then do the simulation, and then place the hand in her lap. So that's one thing you can do. Just make sure the simulation interferes with as little as possible. It can do draping over objects, but if you start the simulation with something in the geometry already, that's going to be tricky. So there we go. That's just one thing I wanted to mention here. So I think I'll go and use this pose, double click it, and that's what we're getting. That's not so bad. Just move her into place onto the planter here. And maybe in my auxiliary viewport, if I go and, well, let me just render a 16:9 scene here. So that's under my render settings, and general. I'll go ahead and make that a widescreen scene, perhaps 1280 by 720. That should be fine. That's that. With the camera selected, I guess I'll move in there a little bit and just frame up my character like so. Perhaps it's a good starting point, and we can always modify that later. That is a possibility, Biscuits, making an option that you don't want simulating, just make that invisible while you simulate. So that's another idea that I haven't actually tried that out yet. Thank you for the tip. That's very exciting. So basically, instead of moving the hand away and then moving it back, you can just turn the geometry invisible and then simulate. That should work. That's true. I've read that invisible geometry is not going to partake in the simulation. So very good tip there. Thank you, Biscuits. That's another thing to try out. I think there's so much that we need to try out with dForce, and you've even released products with it. This is exciting. You got to tell me how you did that, by the way, because one of the things that I still can't get my head around is how to set it up so that it works out of the box, and there's still a lot of questions. So yeah, let's keep the lines of communications open there. So with my woman in place, let's go and make sure she's actually sitting on the planter. So I'll go and hide the skirt, which is hiding underneath Elizabeth here. Let me hide the skirt so I can see that she's hovering a little bit. So let me go and bring her down. I don't want her to intersect with the geometry. Just make her sit on it properly, and also perhaps turn her around. Yeah, so that she's looking at us a little bit more. So I think that's all right. I'm just making sure that her feet aren't too far back, and that we get to see the wonderful cloth draping here on the planter. That's what I'm making sure we're getting here. So there we go. That should do the trick. Let's go ahead and make that summer spirit skirt visible again. And while I'm pausing all this, I need to make absolutely sure, I just want to bring that home to you, that I'm on the last frame of my animation. I don't want to be on the first frame, because otherwise it would have just overwritten and destroyed my other pose. So I'm making absolutely sure I'm on the last frame. DAZ Studio is one of those programs that whichever frame you're on, you're making adjustments, that is already saved in the keyframe. I'm a belt and braces kind of guy. I always like to click a button and make sure that is what's saved there, but that's just me. So DAZ Studio is actually very good at remembering whatever dial you twist on any of the frames that you're on, that is already locked into the animation. So let's have a look at what's going on. If I move my slider, then this is exactly the thing I had envisioned was going to happen. This is more or less how my character is going to sit down. It's not supposed to be a great animation, but what I want to make sure here is that when my character sits down, the cloth here that now intersects with the planter is being accurately draped properly, frame by frame, and then eventually falls into place. That's what I want to make sure. And the same is going to happen with the top, but I don't think we have to worry about the top. That'll just fall the way it falls. He's hoping. Let's see if he's right, shall we? So with my simulation settings active, I can go back to my frames to simulate and just make sure it's set to use timeline play region. I think custom is something in which you can say what frames you want to animate, but I like the idea of just using the timeline there. So let's use the timeline. Click simulate. Before you click simulate, always a good idea to go and save that file and say, let's call it dForce stream. There we go. Always a good idea. Also a good idea, yes, it is, Rod, it is a continual learning curve, and I don't think it'll ever stop in 3D. You know, as soon as you mastered one thing, you go, how do I use Substance Designer? And you go, yeah, how do I in fact use that? You think you know everything about materials, and no, you don't. There's always something else to learn. Oh, I have not tried dForce magnets yet. No, I haven't, Steve. If you know anything about them, please let me know. dForce is something I'm more used to using Marvelous Designer, and dForce is something that's still very kind of new to me. So I'd like to learn more about it. So perhaps if you said you're going to make some tutorials on your channel, that's going to be something I'm very much looking forward to. Steve, just to let everyone know here, Steve has got an extensive background in working with 3D applications in his day job that he's done for many years, and he's used things like Houdini and Cinema 4D and Blender, of course. So he's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. So you know, it's very exciting. I think we can learn a lot from you, and if you have the time to share some of your knowledge on your channel, that would be awesome. I'm very much looking forward to that. I've seen the intro video, so I'm looking forward to more. It's always nice to see other people's workflow, and especially if you have tips and tricks that you want to share with people. That is, you know, that's lovely. I love it when that happens. dForce is kind of doing its thing in the background. Crazy, isn't it? So dForce is kind of doing its thing in the background here, and you can see how it works. So if the character is kind of, the cloth is simulated in a first pass to kind of just fall, and then the character goes and sits down, and with every frame, dForce is having a look at what's intersecting with another geometry and makes sure that doesn't happen. And we're nearly there. Sometimes you'll find that 30 frames just isn't enough, in which case just make that, like I showed you in the beginning, just make the timeline a bit longer with more frames. But what we see here is fairly convincing. In fact, let me put the texture shaded view on, and this is kind of a half see-through pattern. I may just give that something else so that we get a more accurate representation of the cloth. But if you look at all the folds here, that's done a fairly good job, I think. You know, all these things, so nothing's intersecting with the planter anymore. The cloth is actually accurately falling over here, so that's a very cool job. And all this is very difficult to model, so this is why these types of simulation engines are very important. You can also see on the top here, so the top, that's another thing. This kid said that in her description on Renderosity, that the top isn't actually made for Elizabeth. So this is a custom character, but you can see that despite that, the cloth kind of falls accurately as you would expect it. Let me put a slightly different pattern on it here. That's in my content library under clothing, and there's golden biscuits, summer outfit, and here we have the materials. And I'm thinking perhaps because this is a white scene, perhaps I'm going to go with a white thing. This is the skirt here, and I also do the same with the top. Yeah, give it that white pattern. Very beautiful designs here, and you can get so many add-on items for this as well. There we go, very exciting. DOS 3.3, that rocks. That seriously rocks. Let's see what this looks like in a quick render. So before I do anything, I'm just going to go and save this and see what a render brings to the table here without hair. So hair is always one of those things. I'm going to leave hair to the very last minute if we're going to use it at all. So let's see what this looks like. There's only one thing I want to do before I do anything else. Let's switch this to Iray and just have a brief look. I want to make, there's a spotlight, a front light, and I want to point that at the character. So even without doing any expressions on the character, I'm just going to go ahead and point that there, because, oh yeah, and then of course there's the camera framing. Perhaps we're going to went over the top here a little bit. Or also for the sake of this demonstration, perhaps we're going to do away with this 16:9. What do you think? And just go for a square. That'll look perhaps even better. Yeah, so she's a little bit dark right now. Oh, there's also one other thing I believe that Danny and Morphona recommend for this scene to get a better view here. We can always put in their HDRI image. That's another idea to do perhaps. So let's see if we can make that happen. This is the DAZ Studio default image here. So under props, GM, lights. There we go. This is the HDR light that comes with this scene, and that'll take care of the whatever we see on the outside of that window. So let me just bring that in here. That'll look a little bit different. And in the scene, if I open the scene, there's the front light here. With the front light selected on my parameters tab, I can go ahead on the MISC tab. I can now go ahead and point that light at someone. So in my case, I'll go and point that not so much at Elizabeth, but I guess at her hip, at her lower abdomen, upper abdomen, chest lower, chest upper, neck lower, neck upper, head. There we go. That's subject matter illuminated. And that'll just give her a little bit more light on the face, he's hoping. Now, while this is going on, we can see what the denoiser is doing. If I just go ahead and close this tab down, then we get these are the iterations that are now not using the denoiser. And in a moment, we should see the denoiser kick in if I've actually switched it on, which is a good thing to perhaps check, shouldn't I? There we go. The filtering, the post denoiser is on. There we go. So that's the iteration. That must have been like the 8th or 9th iteration, now 10th iteration perhaps, where it kicks in and it's now trying to predict these results. So I don't know if did I mention how they did that? Did I mention that, or was that in rehearsal? Probably during rehearsal. So it's very exciting what's happening in the background there. So how NVIDIA actually came up with the idea of the denoiser is that they've got their own kind of supercomputer. I forgot what it's called, something beginning with D. And basically they told a very fast computer, here's a final render, this is what it's supposed to look like, and here's what this thing looks like after, I don't know, 100 iterations. So very grainy, or after so many iterations, and it's very grainy. And they said, you computer, try to predict what the final result is if you don't have that much information. So if the final result is supposed to be 10,000 iterations, here's what this looks like after 100. What do you think this is going to look like? And the computer made a prediction of what edges and corners and all that's supposed to look like without grain. And every time it went wrong, a human had to say, no, that's not it. No, that's not it. That's not it. But the computer doesn't, of course, get bored by doing the same thing over and over again and just trying a slightly different variation of his prediction. And eventually he was correct at predicting what a final image is going to look like without noise. So they said, okay, remember those results and keep trying and try and improve to get to something that looks like the final render. And just keep trying until you get there. And if you do, remember that. And that's an algorithm that they've developed. And that now brings this kind of, it's not really a rendering speed increase, it's just a visual trick that's employed that the computer can say, hey, if I get a noise pattern like that, then I predict the final result's supposed to look like this. And that's what he's continually applying, this denoising algorithm. And so as the render continues in the background, less noise is naturally available, and that lets the computer more accurately predict how the final render is going to look like. And at one point, I'm not saying we're going to get a better result with that, but we're going to get a result in which we can say, hey, that's close enough for what I need. And that can reduce our time of working with this by about 75%, they reckon. So it's very exciting stuff. It still doesn't look as phenomenal as when you switch it off and let it render for 10 hours or so, but it's certainly going to cut our work time down by a lot. So that's that denoiser, and that's how that works. Yes. That is that it already? Is that it? Have I had anything else? I could tell you how to drape cloth at the back here, like I did in the beginning. That's more or less a repetition of what we did there in the beginning. Perhaps we'll do that to finish off the scene. So yes, this is the denoiser in action. As I said, it works both in the viewport as well as if you do a final render. So good to know that. I'm going to go and switch this scene off again into the smooth shaded viewport. And I'm going to go ahead and drape some cloth over here and over here. I'm going to show you that, how to make it look like cloth is being draped. Where was that again? if you have a disorganized computer, it's really difficult to find anything. That's not it. There we go. Yeah, so this is one thing I wanted to show you, the how to make something drag down from something. So this is just a simple plane. I've already shown you how to do that, but this thing at the back, that's kind of an interesting way that kind of hangs down from, or seemingly hangs down. And the other clothing things have this way of pinning one object to another, so that you can make a flag that's waving in the wind, for example. You pin the side of a plane to a pole on the outside, and then you apply something like a wind force, and then it kind of, the flag wafts and it doesn't go and waft away. That's the idea behind it. So I haven't found those types of pins in DAZ Studio, but the next best thing that we can use for that is just make this a plane and just make it stick into geometry, and then it won't get out. It'll just kind of stick there, and the rest of it will just go and just fall down. So rather than the whole plane going to fall to the ground, one thing is going to stick, and the rest of it is just going to drag down there. Maybe I can recreate that. So with my scene selected here, let's go ahead and select this. Oh, I've made it deselected, didn't I? Yes, it's clever of me, isn't it? So there we go. Select that light. It is actually a light. This is why that effect is going to be very, very nice there. So with that selected, I'll go ahead and create a new primitive. It'll be a plane in this case. And I'll go ahead and say it's just 1 meter should be fine, but again, make sure it has enough divisions. So yeah, 100 divisions is a good starting point. Do you know, Angel, that is a great idea. Maybe we'll do that in a minute. Shall we do that? Let's try that. Let's see what happens. In fact, let's do that right away with with what I'm trying to do now. If I'm going to go and hide the light and then simulate it and see if the thing drapes over the wall only, it's going to be a great idea. Now, where's that plane? There we go, that's the plane. Oh yes, of course, it's right at the bottom here, isn't it? Hey. Speaking of keyboard shortcuts, Steve was telling me that there is a way to bring up the mapped keyboard shortcuts, and that is something I've been exploring as well. Keyboard shortcuts, there's just so many of them in DAZ Studio, and there's an article on my website. Julia, maybe you can find it. It's on verslewis.com. It's about keyboard shortcuts in DAZ Studio. Somebody, I don't know who, somebody in the DAZ Studio forums has written a script, in fact, that when you load that in DAZ Studio, you can bring up a window that tells you all the keyboard shortcuts that are currently mapped. And the cool thing about that is also that it will show you things that you've mapped yourself. So that's going to be nice. Julia's going to try and find that and post that in the chat. So here's my plane, and I'm going to go and try and insert that gently into the wall, just like so. Can you see that here? That's what I'm trying to do. So the plane is kind of hovering right here, and if I want that to be fixed into the wall, all I need to do is make sure it just goes into here and it's kind of stuck in there, as far as I know. I'm sure there's pins and all that's probably going to be coming, but right now we don't really have that, as far as I know. So with our timeline selected again, this is here. I've made a dreadful mistake. I was on frame 30. It's kind of good that this has happened. I was on frame 30 while I was placing this this thing in here. So I'm hoping that by the time, oh yeah, look, I can move it. Sometimes what happens if you put something in on frame 0 and then you're on frame 30 and you make something, you position that, then the thing is going to just, it's just not going to look good. So I hope it's going to work. So with the plane selected, I would go ahead and once again head over to Edit, Object, Geometry, and on the bottom I'm going to go and add this thing here, the Add Dynamic Surface Modifier. Biscuits, you've worked with dForce before in products. Do you know if there's any way to figure out, as soon as I've done what I've just done here, add the dynamic surface modifier to my object, is there a way to find out where that is? Because right now it's not showing up here in the scene tab, so I don't really know if I've done this on the object or not. I mean, I've got it on tape, I have done it, but if I had forgotten, or if I'm examining somebody else's scene, is there a way to figure out which objects have dynamic surfaces attached? It'd be interesting to find out. If you've found out, please let me know. That'd be good to know. So with what I'm expecting should happen now is it really? Let's have a look, Rob, shall we? That's very exciting. So on here, where might the simulation? Yes, Rob, you're the man. Yes, absolutely, Angel, absolutely. Angel and Rob got it right. 100 points for you. Sadly, you didn't win a car, but thank you. That's where that's hiding. I knew it had to be there. So great. Okay, that opens another, that kind of answers another mystery of where we can set two different types of material. So I guess here I can now see that this plane, I could see I have a different bend stiffness or whatever, or different damping than on a different material. So that's how I can have two materials in the same scene that behave differently. Oh, this is something I'll explore over the weekend. Very nice. Thank you, guys. Very nice. Yes, fake internet points. At one point you'll be able to buy something with it, like, you know, Bitcoin or something. Yeah, it'll be like DAZ coins. That'd be good. So that's where that's hiding. Thank you so much for clearing that up, guys. This is exciting. So let's go ahead and simulate this, and just simulate this right now with the light visible still. I'd just like to see what happens there. In another window, I guess we also see that our cloth for Elizabeth is still simulating, so that's also cool. All right, so right now I can see that the cloth is being draped over the light. That's good. Oh, I should maybe perhaps show you this as well. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is exactly what I would expect. I think in my previous tests the length of this cloth requires a longer simulation, so I think we can't do this in only 30 frames. I think we need something longer for that. But you get the point. We'll do that in a moment. I just wanted to check if this works now. We'll see what happens in a moment when we go ahead and make that light invisible. I guess we get the picture for now. Oh. All right, David, thank you so much. That is exciting. I'm going to check that out. Thank you so much for the link. dForce tutorials. Whoa, did you write those yourself? Are those your tutorials? David, that'd be really nice. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Very good. Oh, looks like 30 frames was actually enough, so that's good to know. That's good to know. Thank you so much for sharing your tutorials. I really appreciate that community spirit that we've got going here. That's very nice. That's very nice. We're all learning from one another. That's very cool. Excellent. So good. You can cancel the animation at any point in time if it's taking a bit too long. I think we could just about wait for it. So we can see that this cloth is now draped over that light at the background. So that's kind of how I had expected. If we see this in the actual camera, this is very similar to what I've made there in my preview scene, in my demo scene. So that's good. There's the other thing I wanted to check now is if we go and bring our timeline slider back to the first frame here. I would like to see what happens if I invisibilize the wall light. So just make that invisible. No wall light there. We're still sticking the cloth into the wall, and see what happens when we simulate this again. Let's see what if this means the cloth is now going to be lying flat against the wall. That would be proving the theory as to does it make sense? Does it make sense to invisibilize the object and then see what happens? The thing just disappeared there for a second. Okay, it looks like it's certainly not acknowledging the light, but it's also not acknowledging the wall behind it, which is slightly disconcerting. But then it could also be that the cloth is kind of waiting for a geometry intersection there. Can we do something while it's simulating? No. So it could just be that this is all, that this doesn't have divisions, and the thing would only stick when there is an actual division in the geometry. That could be. Yeah. Okay, so this is something that needs a little bit of more experimentation, I guess. But hey, that's what those lonely weekends are for, isn't it? Okay, if I bring the wall light back. What was that? Yeah, so I thought my plan was, Steve, to have the plane just be stuck in the wall. So because beforehand it was kind of working well, that the plane, which is kind of inserted gently into the wall, I thought it was just going to make it stick there, and then just ignore the light, but otherwise just still stuck at the top of the wall and fall down. I guess that didn't quite work. That did it. So that's something that we need to work on. There we go. Delete. And yeah, I guess that was it. I'm going to totally check out David's dForce tutorials, and yeah, that's I guess that's all we can talk about today. Is that good? Is it a good time to finish up here? Possibly. I don't really know how that works. Clue me in. What does the static modifier actually do? Can you let me know? Because I have no idea. I'm not sure if I can actually select the wall as such. No, actually the wall doesn't exist as such. It's just the wall is, the whole room is just one object. It doesn't, the wall isn't defined as such. Yes, I think in this case, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I got to play around with this. I'm not sure if right now. I'm not sure how to stick this cloth piece into the wall so that it doesn't fall down. Are there you guys who've worked with dForce before? Are there things like pins that I can pin my cloth onto anything? Does that exist in dForce? Because the only thing I can see is maybe something that I can attach to the geometry or something. One of those things. I'm not entirely sure. Let's check this out. This is maybe a good time to do this for another for another live stream, or perhaps for a pre-recorded tutorial. No, I don't think so either. With the surface zone, with a different dForce value. Yes, it's one of those things. I'll go ahead and play around with this and see if I can work it out. In the meantime, do keep those tips coming. I really appreciate that. I'll post that. I'll flesh out that tutorial, not the tutorial. I'll flesh out that article about how the denoiser works, and I'm going to go and let you go after just an hour. So this is the first time I've been able to manage to make a live stream that takes under an hour. That, well, it is just over an hour, but it's, you know, it's certainly not 2 hours, which is maybe a little bit long. So one of those things. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. I love this spirit. Let's keep it up. Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Julie and I are hatching plans to start a second stream in a week. Or in the week, so that we have the Friday morning slot for the DAZ Studio bits and bobs and the 3D related stuff. But then on Saturday, so basically tomorrow in the evening at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't know if we're going to make it tomorrow or not. Watch that YouTube community tab and the social networks for that. We're hatching plans to do some video gaming. So that allows us to look at some amazing 3D environments like Subnautica, or, you know, all these amazing things that are rendered in real time, and we can all have a look at that. And that's kind of hang time, and we can keep sharing tips and tricks and things we've found out during the week. That's what we're trying to do. Hey, Biscuits, thank you so much. That's amazing. Biscuits has just given me 99 cents via Super Chat. This is awesome. These are the two ways you can support me. There's on one hand, you can go over to my Patreon campaign and donate something if you really like what I'm doing, my mission to make the world a better place. It's very encouraging when that happens. In fact, it did happen yesterday. I was helping somebody with a WordPress tip and trick, and I just did it. We just had a chat on Facebook, and at the end of it, he said, "Hey, can I buy you a drink?" And I said, "Oh, kind enough, you can go to my Patreon campaign." And he signed up. He loves it. It is so encouraging when this happens. So thank you so much. All this interaction is phenomenal, and it's a lot of fun for me. It's a lot of fun for you. But then if on top of that you get financial compensation in the tip jar, my God, the world can be a wonderful, wonderful place. So thank you so much. And Biscuit's just done this via Super Chat. So this is that little dollar sign that is available on yes, your VIP Patreon, exactly, VIP Patreon. Steve, thank you so much for joining, and have a good night in Australia. It's phenomenal that you could make it. So I've been thinking about this. So let me just finish this thing off. Biscuits has donated via Super Chat, which is that little dollar sign at the bottom of the chat. It was available in premieres and on live streams, and you can give a one-off amount that just goes into my tip jar. And Biscuits, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Steve, I've been thinking particularly about you because this time slot is maybe a little bit of a stretch. I do understand that it's so late. It's now 3 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. So I'm yes, you need to go to bed. So I've been thinking about you on the second live stream. If we're going to do that later in the day, it'll be like in the morning at your time. So Sunday mornings, wake up with a cup of coffee and join us for a round of Subnautica. Perhaps tomorrow. I'm not entirely sure if Julia and I feel up for it. Julia's a bit under the weather, so. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. This was phenomenal. I will see you definitely next Friday. And watch out for DAZ Studio 101. More tutorials coming up during the week. Promise. Take care. Bye-bye.